I'd like to introduce our speakers today. Uh, First of all, we have Whit Roberts, who joins us. He's the Deputy Managing Partner of Locke Lord's Dallas office, and I would mention a great friend to the Rolling Center, even though he's a UT alum. We appreciate that, Whit. He has extensive experience in a broad range of M&A activity, corporate finance, and other corporate and joint venture transactions. Whit is listed in the best lawyers in America for M&A and for corporate law, and has been selected in Texas Super Lawyers and D Magazine's Best Lawyers in Dallas. He has extensive experience in equity and debt financing, as well as reporting and disclosure requirements under security law. He has represented companies through their life cycle, from the founding to early stage, and follow on to public and private financing, to acquisitions, and to exit. He has worked on initial public offerings and follow-up public offerings in a range of industries. And as I mentioned, he's also an alumni of UT School of Law at UT Austin. Tom Yoxall also joins us. He is the vice chair of the firm and a member of the firm's executive committee. He handles financial services cases, class action litigation, and general commercial litigation, and has been recognized as a Texas Super Lawyer every year between 2004 and 2019. He has extensive experience handling federal and state governmental regulatory investigations, as well as internal whistleblower investigations. He frequently defends clients in nationwide and state class action. Tom regularly litigates cases involving mortgage, lending practices, automobile dealer financing, consumer rebates, antitrust, products liability, breach of warranty, fraud, fair debt collection practices, and consumer protection. Tom has extensive experience in general commercial litigation and has tried several lawsuits involving significant questions of constitutional law. And we're honored to say that Tom is also a graduate of the SMU Dedman School of Law. So gentlemen, thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Eric. Can a UT alumni say pony up? I will right here.
Please, although, we've kind of co-opted you into the family, welcome.
I'm pleased to be a part. I married into it as well. My wife is a SMU alum. Thanks everybody for joining today. This is Whit Roberts. You can see my longtime friend and partner, Tom Yoxall. I'm very quickly going to hand it over to him. Tom is, as Eric said, vice chair of the whole firm. We're a law firm of 650 or ballpark 650 lawyers across, I think 20 or more offices in the United States, London, and Hong Kong. And so we are looking forward to speaking with you today about law firm economics. Whether you're joining a large law firm or a mid-size or boutique law firm, the principles that we're going to be talking about today apply in all those situations. Tom and I have been lawyers at Locke since 1992, I'm proud to say, and to call Tom Yoxall a friend for that amount of time. But with all of that background and experience in mind, Tom, why don't you take it away?
Good deal. Thanks, Whit. Really appreciate you having us, Eric. It's really great to join this SMU crowd. I am an alum, graduated in 1992. Now I'm a Longhorn first. I went to UT and then now went to SMU Law School, and then clerked for a federal judge, and then joined the firm in 1993. So really pleased to be here with you guys and talk about law firm economics. Eric, you want to go ahead and, is the screen, you want to go ahead and share the
yeah, let me try that. I'm struggling a little bit to find it here. Let me just take it for a moment.
So as you're launching it, Eric, let me jump in and make an initial
go ahead, Whit, and
we can talk about, and that is this. You're talking to a couple of older guys now, Tom and I. It's painful for us to say, but we think back to when we started practicing law, and the world just quite simply has changed. And we hope that we will address over the course of this time both the business of practicing law and what it means to advance yourself as a professional and as someone that clients will come to as a trusted advisor, counselor, attorney, with the technical expertise to address a client's issues. Today, is, and by the very title of the firm, excuse me, by the very title of the program, excuse me, we're going to be addressing how the economics of a law firm work. But we always want to keep in mind that law firms are populated with talented people who are licensed to practice law. And so we will be addressing both of those topics along the way. Eric, are we able to put the frame up?
I think so. Actually, Andre, let me ask you if you're able to share from your side. I'm struggling here, as I mentioned. I think,
Oh.
is that it?
Some progress.
All
Got a
right.
screen.
Hmm.
There you go. You're on it.
That
Click
it?
on that one.
That is it.
Okay. All right. Very good. Okay, let's proceed.
Yeah, I think you need to maybe click on it, Eric. I'm not sure it's coming up unless
Try
others see
that
it.
there. Nope. So are you seeing anything?
Just your list of
see
files.
Yeah, I'm not sure why that's doing that. Showing the wrong screen.
I think you need to click on the actual presentation and then click share screen on that.
Yeah, I did that and it's reverting to this other screen and I'm not finding that one. So let me just apologize for the delay.
Oh, I just saw it in your.
Yeah.
One thing you learn as a lawyer, gang, is that oftentimes there can be technical difficulties. So,
Right.
while Eric's pulling that up, I wanted to add a couple things to what Whit just said. Obviously, what we're talking about today is that law firms are a business, and it's changed a lot. Whit and I have seen it over 27 to 28 years. The practice of law has changed a lot from more of a bottom line business. We are as lawyers, there you go. You got it.
All right.
Being a lawyer is working in a service industry. This is not, we don't make widgets. We don't make anything. We work in a service industry. And so at the end of the day, Whit and I, and you will in the future, we sell our time. We fix problems, whether it's on the corporate side as Whit does, or on the litigation side as I do. Just lost the screen.
Okay.
But with respect to what we do, it's really a service industry. So today, in today's world, as law firms and bigger law firms, but smaller law firms deal with the same thing. We deal with a lot of reporting nationally about how firms are doing economically. There's lots of competition out there for business. And so, firms have to be well run. They have to be efficient. The economics have to be strong. And at the same time, we have a lot of demanding clients out there that want their work done efficiently. And they obviously, they want excellent legal work. But we have to be smart. We have to be efficient as to how we practice law and how we get great results for clients. So in our view, and I know Whit agrees with this, the key for us is, being a great firm with great people that has excellent work and a great culture. But at the end of the day, it has to be profitable for it to succeed, whether it's a small firm, mid-sized firm, or a big firm. And Whit and I, we started at Locke, Purnell, Rain, Harrell back in 1992. We've seen 3 mergers in our lifetime, at Locke. And each one of those mergers has been helpful to the firm over time. And so, we've been flexible. We've seen great things come out of those mergers. And it's just we have an interesting perspective to watch our firm grow from a law firm of less than 200 lawyers to over 600 during our time. So, with that introduction, Eric, how are we doing? Do we have can we pull it up?
Still struggling. Let me see. All right, let's try this again.
I could see if I can try to pull up from our end, Eric, but
Yeah,
I mean,
Andre, you on there? I don't know if you're able to
Uh,
join it.
can Andre help
Yeah,
there?
let me give
Yeah.
it a shot now. I'll see if
Yeah,
I can
That
pull it
might
up
help
quickly.
me. It's just not selecting that particular. I have multiple screens and it's not finding it.
yeah, if someone enables me to put it up, I can do so as well.
Yeah,
Yeah, I can do that too if you like, but let's see.
just let us know, Andre. We can.
Yep, just quickly looking for it. Got it here.
So Whit, I've added you if you'd like, but we'll see what Andre can do there.
Do you guys see this?
There we go.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect.
One thing I would add, just as people have questions, if you can place them in the chat box and we'll monitor those and ask as we go.
And we're happy to entertain questions during the presentation.
Thank you.
All right, Tom, let's
Yep.
jump in.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on. Andre, just scroll down to the next screen. So, yeah,
Yeah, just
H2.
next one.
there you go.
Perfect.
Okay, so the bottom line, and this for some of you in this audience, some of this may sound very basic, and we're going to kind of move at kind of a somewhat of a high level, but we're going to dig into the nitty gritty of law firm economics. So this screen really shows the bottom line of law firm economics. You have our revenue, which is legal fees, whether that's hourly or you've probably heard a lot about alternative fee arrangements, flat fees, monthly fees, as opposed to per hour. Whit and I have grown up during an era where primarily it's hourly work. We have an hourly rate and we charge for that. So that's your revenue. And then the key expenses within a firm are attorney compensation, that's both for partners and then non-partners. Staff compensation, obviously any firm is going to have significant staff. A firm of our size, we have hundreds of staff members, from the mailroom to assistants to paralegals, our business folks. And by the way, I mean, our firm is very well run. We have a very strong administrative staff. So that's a very important piece of the firm. Then there's rent, and we're going to talk about that more in a minute, but the leases that a law firm has, we have approximately 20 offices. And so we have, lease space and rent at all those offices. And then insurance for the lawyers, property insurance, all kinds of insurance. That's another significant expense that results ultimately in determining we got revenue, the legal fees, less the expenses, and that turns into the net income. The partners, the equity partners, who we'll talk about in a little bit, they are compensated out of that net income. There's distributions, and then there's monthly draws and annual distributions, quarterly and annual distributions that are paid from the net income of the firm. So ultimately, revenues for a firm are impacted by billing rates and hours billed, resulting in the net income.
Tom, I'll jump in.
Go ahead, Whit.
I was just going to say, guys, you look at the chart and you say, well, how long could this program be? I mean, it's, take your revenue, you take off 4 or 5 different expense items, and then that's how you run a law firm. We'll get into, different parts of that component that makes running a law firm with more complicated. But I do think at this point, what I would point out is as a partner, and Tom, as a partner, we really want to get to what the size of the pie is on net income. And if you look at the expenses, whether it's attorney comp, staff compensation, rent, or insurance, in almost every situation, those are fixed costs at the beginning of the year. And so our goal is to try to control those expenses as partners and maximize the revenues, because what's left over after all those, in almost every case, fixed costs, comes to the partners.
One thing you will hear a lot of as we talk about things is overhead. So overhead is, and you'll see a pretty significant dollar amount for our overhead, which is $280,000 per lawyer. Really, overhead is all of the expenses except attorney compensation. So we'll talk a fair amount about that in a minute. So let's go ahead and move on, Andre.
Tom,
to the next.
we have just one question, and I'll put it out there, and you can answer it when it fits in. But where do Westlaw and in-house library, to the extent you still have a library, right? Well, when I was working at a law firm, we had a library with two or three librarians that were in-house on site, and that was just for our office, and I'm sure others had that too. I imagine it's changed, but that's the question. And are those expensive mostly passed on to the client? And I'm sure you'll get to sort of what things you're able to charge to clients and otherwise, but that comes
Right.
usually.
And we will, so obviously the library is an expense. Libraries have changed big time. When Whit and I started at the firm, we had an entire floor, actually 3/4 of the floor, 21st floor of Chase Tower was our library. That has
We're very proud of it. It was the largest private law firm library in west of the Mississippi.
Yeah. And
although our view of that changed as our view of expenses changed. Tom?
yeah, so those are part of the expense line items, and we'll get to that in a minute. The bottom line is some clients allow you to pass on Westlaw and Lexis type charges, others do not. And so it just really, and we'll talk about this, it comes down to the client relationship that you have. But many clients, I do a lot of work for banking clients. Many of those clients do not allow us to pass on those types of expenses. And those can be fairly high. As you guys know, Lexis and Westlaw charges can be high. Now, there's lots of other resources out there now in terms of electronic research. But that's a very good question. It's it kind of falls within the 20% of other expenses. So let's move to these profit margin drivers. Obviously, the goal, as Whit was just saying a minute ago, is to increase our profitable revenues. How do you do that? You try to increase your billing rates and maximize rate realization, meaning you're trying to get to 100% realization on the rate that you charge per hour. Now, we'll see in a minute, that's fairly uncommon to be at 100% realization. But you try to maximize that as much as possible. Another piece is you try to leverage your work to lower cost attorneys. So you try to obviously push work down to lower cost attorneys, younger associates, mid-level associates. One thing that's interesting in the market now is clients, many clients don't want to pay for brand new lawyers. They don't want to pay us for training new lawyers. So some clients will demand that we start with mid-level associates. So the challenge now sometimes is how to train our new lawyers and get them good work. But there's always the push to try to have younger lawyers, lower cost lawyers handling certain types of matters. Also, we want to try to attract work that can sustain the higher billing rates, more complex transactions like Whit does, class actions like I do, where clients understand that it's a significant complex issue and it demands high level work. Every firm, big or small, is going to kind of have key industry sectors where you're focused. So you're trying to use your resources as best you can. For example, our industry sectors are energy and infrastructure, finance and financial services, insurance and reinsurance, pharmaceutical and private equity. We do all kinds of work, but those are our 5 key sectors. So we try to focus our work in those areas. The flip side is you try to decrease your expenses, and you'll see on this chart, the expenses are real estate costs, staffing levels. You try to smartly staff. I think Whit, when you and I started at the firm, I think most secretaries had 2 to 3 lawyers. Now the ratio is more like 4 to 5 lawyers for an assistant. So that's changed over time. I mentioned using lower cost attorneys. And at the end of the day, one way to decrease expenses is efficiency and excellence. I mean, that's just trying to do great work. And we're going to talk about that kind of at the end. But you'll see this chart, the top 3 expenses. You've got attorney compensation. Remember, partner compensation comes out of net income. So on the expense side, below the line, 40% is attorney compensation, 25% is staff compensation. Then you've got office leases at 15%, and then all other. So 80% of the cost at a firm is comp and real estate. So those are pretty significant. I saw a question and it popped away. Did Eric,
Yeah,
what was your
I
question?
can read that to you, and I think you may get to this later. It's definitely relevant. This is from Sean. Speaking of your expenses, do firms prepare for the inevitability, especially your energy, as you mentioned, for economic downturn and natural market shifts? And what about large sudden events like the natural disasters or pandemic? How did the pandemic in particular affect Locke? And do you think your efforts taken so far will be enough to weather the changes that are still forthcoming? And I would add too, sort of this is a little more predictable, but the drop in the price of oil, for instance, and what effects that's had probably on your business.
So great
Tom,
questions.
Tom,
I mean, obviously there's a lot there. Go ahead, Whit. Go
Crowd
ahead.
is not messing around with the questions. We're diving right in, aren't we?
Yeah. No, great. I mean, those
This
are great
is a
questions.
sharp bunch here. We're not going to let you off easy.
Couple quick things. First of all, the diversity of a firm in terms of types of work is so very, very critical. We are weathering the storm tremendously right now because we have a very diverse firm. While some corporate transactions may be down, frankly, some litigation may be down, other types of businesses up, such as employment, such as bankruptcy. So when you have a diverse firm, you can plan for these issues. Now, did anybody plan for the pandemic? No. But I would say, and we deal with the financials every day here, we're doing very, very good. We did adjust our budget, frankly, because of expectations of reduced income coming in. But frankly, clients have really kept paying. Obviously, clients have their own challenges. Some have asked to pay, over time. But the bottom line is we are weathering the storm in a tremendous fashion. Now we've done actually pay reductions kind of across the board, but those have really held steady, and we haven't had to do anything else. And we're actually having a very good year within this pandemic. But Whit, you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, I'll add a couple of thoughts. I mean, just in the couple of slides we've been through, everybody, you can see that one of the fixed costs is attorney compensation. And there are times where we as a law firm and other law firms talk about leverage, not in terms of borrowed money, but in terms of lawyers who are paid a salary, who are doing work for the firm. And people will talk about a pyramid structure or leverage of associates to partners. You can view that as a way of increasing, just like debt exposes you to some risk in a slowdown, having more associates per partner increases the risk to a firm during a slowdown. And so if you wanted to look at risk factors, being a law firm that was entirely an oil and gas firm, entirely in Texas, with one partner for 10 associates who are being paid a salary, that would be a risky place to be right now because of the slowdown, because you have all of those fixed costs for all of those associates. Now, I'm grateful to be where we are. Now, let me say on the flip side, in the good times, when there's a lot of oil and gas work and the associates can do all of it, the partners get to reap the reward for all of the profit. But during a downturn, that's where leverage in terms of attorneys ends up turning against the partners in a firm. And we can get more into that later on. But since the question was brought up here, that's where a lot of the risk is. And there are times where Locke Lord, in the really, really heady times where it's a really frothy economy, we may not make the amount of money that another firm that has a lot more attorney leverage makes. But that's simply a decision of the management of each firm. How do they want their attorney leverage to work, both in the good times and with the prospect of the wind turning back in your face? Tom, I'll hand it back over to you.
So, since you're on this topic, I did want to throw one thing in there, and Whit, I think maybe you and I briefly talked about it, but with the pandemic, it sort of revealed the benefits and maybe liabilities of having a large real estate footprint, right? And I know you have a lot of offices. Have you kind of rethought how that looks for the firm, and if maybe work from home is a model that's more attractive to you, and thereby allows you to have less exposure from a real estate perspective? And then also, how do you move to that kind of profile from where you are now?
It's a great question, and I'll brag on our management, the administrative and management folks at our firm, because they're trying to be ahead of the game on this. But Tom, you're at these executive committee meetings as vice chair. Why don't you describe the focus?
Yeah, so Eric, it's a great question, and I was gonna kind of get to it in a little bit, but I'll deal with it now. We are literally in the middle of that analysis. Here in Dallas, we're already actually reducing our space a little bit. Now, every office is going to be subject to the lease that you are under. So we are looking at opportunities based upon the leases that we have to make changes, because I think at the end of the day, the world has changed especially for bigger law firms. As you know, the consulting firms do a lot of hoteling. I don't see us going to that model, but people, back to the prior question about how we're doing, people have done very, very well working at home. And so I think the real estate is going to change for us. We will use less space as you look 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. I think law firms just will not use as much space. It's going to be a process to get there, but there's no question that that will happen. And we're literally right in the middle of it right now. Now, the flip side of that, and this gets back, as you know, I started before about the culture and the people. Whit and I are still with Locke Lord because it's a great place to work. Great people, lots of interaction. And the balance, there's this balancing issue of what do you do about work from home versus having people at the office where you have that interaction, that mentoring, all of that is so very, very important. And so that's the challenge, Eric, that we're going to face is while we certainly, there's no question, we will reduce our real estate costs and reduce our space. But we have to do it in such a way where we don't sacrifice the culture of the firm. And that's a challenge that most firms are going to experience. And so we're literally, I mean, we just actually have started a task force that was started this week by the firm to look at the cultural issues of how do we deal with work from home, because we want to be flexible. And so it's a very interesting issue that we're living right now.
It's a great answer.
We can move to the next screen pretty quickly, but I'll add to that. Tom and I think about, litigators like Harriet Myers and corporate lawyers like Guy Kerr and Don Glendenning and state bar presidents like Frank Stevenson and others whose name you guys may recognize. Those are all people that we learned from. And we learned from them because we were around them. And hopefully there are younger attorneys that feel the same way about Tom and feel the same way about me. But that's the human side that we always have to keep in mind as we're trying to be as efficient and disciplined as possible on the economic factors that we're talking about in this presentation.
I mean, as an example, last week, Whit and I did a leadership lunch with our summer clerks where we were all via Zoom, just like this. I mean, we're trying, in the middle of this current pandemic, we're trying to deal with these issues, but it's a challenge, and we will continue to do the best we can. So, yeah, let's move on to the next slide 4. Okay, very quickly. So, the way that a firm creates revenue is the billing cycle. And this is pretty simple. I mean, there's hourly rates. One thing we encourage our lawyers to do, which is key to firm economics, is keep their time religiously every day. It's one of the hardest things about practicing law that many of you will find is maintaining your time, but it is so very, very critical to the health and the strength of law firm economics is that the lawyers, each person from the most senior partner to the youngest brand new associate, that they keep their time. And so with that time, there's a bill that's generated every month. The partners, Whit and I, review our bills, and you'll have if you're a busy partner, you've got a stack of bills. Again, that's a challenge to do. And then you walk through those bills, you send them to the client, and then hopefully the client pays. We very carefully watch, how long bills are outstanding. Some clients are better than others about paying quickly. So the key is you've got hours and fees worked, you got hours and fees billed, and then you've got hours and fees collected that turn into revenue. And timely billing and staying on top of clients is the key to success. If a lawyer fails to send out bills and they let bills go 2 or 3 or 4 months, that makes a client very, very unhappy. You might think the client enjoys not getting billed, but then when they get hit with a 5-month-old bill, that's never a good relationship thing for clients. So timekeeping and timely billing is very, very, very important. Whit, anything on that?
No, it's just everyone here understands the time value of money, and that's really all that's going on here.
Okay, Andre, let's go to the next one.
We actually have one question from Isabella that I think fits in, but it's for your non-paying clients, which might be the case now. How do you account for those, and are they treated as bad debt or some other way?
Well, so, you try to work with the client who's struggling. Many times it's where a client's having issues, and you try to work with them over time. At some point, you might negotiate a resolution if there's a big outstanding AR and reduce it. And we're about to talk about reductions here coming up. Or unfortunately, in some situations, sometimes you end up writing off time. And a lot of it is really because a client is struggling significantly and just doesn't have the money to pay. But that's just a reality of what we do. And it's really on a case-by-case basis, Eric. Does that answer the question? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
So another term you'll hear Whit and I use a lot, and you'll hear about in your practice, is realization. So the realization of standard bill rates. Every lawyer at a firm is going to have a standard hourly rate. Now, you may adjust that rate, as we're about to talk about, depending on the client relationship. So, I mentioned earlier, it's hard to get 100% realization on your rates. It's really, as this slide shows, it's more typical to have about 80% realization. And so you wonder, how does that happen? And it really can kind of happen in 3 different ways. And something that's very important in the client relationship is working with the client to try to reach an agreement that's good for the law firm, because we're a business, back to where we started, but also good for the client, where they feel like they're getting a fair, they're being charged a fair amount for very, very good work. So essentially, this chart shows how the realization rate can go from 100% down to 80%, and kind of the 3 ways. First of all, there may be a standard discount. Here, you're showing about a 10% discount and that's very common, really common. I know both Whit and I do it. Again, I work for a lot of banking clients and mortgage servicer clients. They demand a lot of discounts. So you can go from 100% to 90%, frankly, very quickly sometimes. Then there's a situation of once you're at the 90%, you may, before you ever send the bill out, back to that stack of bills that Whit and I may go through, as the billing partner, you may see inefficiencies. You may feel like that memo that was written, while it showed that it took 20 hours to research and write, you may reduce it, down to 10 or 15 hours. So that's a write down of unbilled time, as reflected here, in this kind of example. So that's right. Say it's a 7% discount where you write off time on the bill before it's billed. Then you bill it. So when you bill it, in this example, you're at about 83% realization. At that point, your client may do some write-offs on their own, or they may call and say, hey, why did this cost this much? And so that third piece can result in reductions, which in this example takes it down to about 80%. So each one of those steps can end up decreasing the revenue for the firm. And this is just a number I want y'all to kind of think about. So for a law firm our size, so we're about $500 million in revenues every year, generally. For us, every 1% of realization improvement, so if you go from 80 to 81%, that equates to about $7 million in additional net income. So 1% improvement equates to about $7 million in net income. And obviously that just accrues to the bottom line. So the strong push in every law firm is to try to limit reductions and try to keep your realization rate up as much as possible. But that's, the key there is working with your client, having a great client relationship, and just kind of working through it. And all of us, Whit and I, all of our partners, we all have to deal with discounts. And it's just a fact of life. And you try to limit those discounts because at the end of the day, it's a business and you try to do the best you can. Whit, you want to add anything to that?
I'll only add that Tom's done a very nice job of explaining each step where discounts could occur. That's not the way life works. Either someone has to discount because it just took too much time, and that makes up a large part of a discount, or there's a client that's very demanding. And guys, I mean, if you have a client that says, I'm going to give you millions of dollars worth of work, but I want you to do it at a certain discount, the firm, if there's enough work, we can make that work, and there's room and reason to be flexible. So while we talk about this going from $1 down to 80 cents, I don't want you guys to think that every client works through every step this way. If that's kind of an industry average, because we're really kind of talking about industries here, this isn't Lock Lord specific. You get to that in different ways with different clients.
Yep. Okay, why don't we move to the next one? So we've been talking about the revenue side. Let's talk about the expenses, and this kind of goes to some of the questions from earlier.
Exactly.
Just a bit of a reminder. So in terms of the expenses, you got attorney comp, staff comp, office leases, and then all other. So again, 80% of the other, there's actually a question just popped up. How do you make up for your discount? Do you raise your rate? So at the end of the day, I mean, one thing on discounts is you want to try to, we'll get to this in a minute, but business development, you want to try to bring in as much work as possible. You try to reduce the discounts, but something that firms do every year is you do try to raise your hourly rates if you can. Some clients are more amenable to that than others, but you do try to raise your rates, and that's certainly one way to try to deal with discounts. But on the expense side, 80% of it is comp and real estate. The other 20% are all the other expenses that are shown here, which, there's a lot of different things that come into play within a law firm. The big ticket items in that list are IT expenses. And I will say Whit and I are very blessed with our firm. We have a great IT team. We have a great security team. And that's, as you all know, privacy and security for law firms is really, really important. We get hit with spam, email, all kinds of stuff every day. So we spend a lot of money on those things. Our errors and omission insurance is, for the lawyers, is a big piece. And so that's a big expense within that 20%. As we mentioned earlier, the library and publications, it's something we look at every year. Do we need the hard copies? Do we need or should we go to all electronic? So there's just a lot that's here that really impacts the expense side. And down there at the bottom, the client development expenses, again, Whit and I are really lucky within our firm. The firm is very generous on client development expenses, travel and entertainment. We contribute a lot. We're very, very active in the community, which is important because you want to be active in the community because that helps lead to business development. It raises the profile of the firm, all those kinds of things. We're members of many, many different organizations. We're very, very involved, but all of that costs money. But again, we're lucky in that the firm supports that. And it's just part of one of the expenses that we deal with. So,
Tom, here's a question from Andrew that's somewhat related to what you just talked about, but you mentioned all of the insurance, payroll, medical benefits. How has that changed, or how are you looking at that in terms of the pandemic?
So that has not changed so much yet, Eric. I mean, we're, our HR folks are looking at those issues right now. There's been no immediate change. Certainly, we evaluate our insurance every year, and depending on staff, associates, and whether you have a family, part of it's covered by the firm, part of it's not. Now, as partners, Whit and I pay, we pay fully for our insurance, but for associates, for non-partners, insurance is partially covered for the other members of the firm. But in terms of changing the insurance in response to the pandemic, we haven't reached any conclusions on that, Eric, and I'm sure the HR folks are busily looking at that, but there's been no change yet. Whit, anything to add on expenses?
No, let's keep moving.
Okay. Let's flip to, so we're going to go to attorney compensation. We go to beyond that, go to the next slide. This is just to give you a couple of examples of attorney comp, and we'll really focus on associates and how we calculate what it costs, and then how the revenue impacts the net income. So essentially, in this example, for our first year associate salary is $180,000. I mentioned earlier overhead. So everything but comp on the expense side is considered overhead. So per lawyer within our firm, when you think about all these leases and insurance and all these things around the firm, it's about $280,000 per lawyer for overhead on an annual basis. Now, smaller firms, it's going to be a lower amount. This is just our firm, but this is a pretty good number as far as big firms go. So the total so-called cost to the firm for a first-year associate is $460,000. So that's where you're starting. You've got $180,000 in comp and then $280,000 in overhead. So let's go to the next slide. We'll talk about, kind of give an example of how these realizations impact ultimately net income. So we're going to give you two examples of two first-year associates, Associate XX and YY, very common names. But so if they each bill 2,100 hours at $350 an hour, and they're both paid $180,000 for their salary, here's an example of how things might go. So if on XX, if that person's at 85% realization on their hourly work, that translates into $625,000 in revenue for that young lawyer. YY realization may be lower. Now, there can be all kinds of reasons for the realization being lower, as we talked about. It could be an agreed discount, writing down time, or the client pays less. So that person is at 440 because it's 60% realization. So between these two people, there's a far different story in terms of the net income on those two. XX, who is 85% realization, the firm makes approximately $165,000 on that associate. However, on YY, because of the reduced realization, the firm loses $20,000 on that associate. So you can see, depending on individual performance and realization, the numbers can be vastly different in terms of the net income on an individual lawyer for the firm. So go to the next slide, kind of shows them side by side. It's really the same hypothetical between these two lawyers that results in, the XX having a profit of $165 and then YY having a loss of $20,000. At the end of the day, real quickly on associate compensation, at Locke, like many firms, we have a base comp, and then there are kind of set bonuses if you hit certain hours, and then there's a discretionary bonus piece. For the younger lawyers, the brand new lawyers, there's really kind of set bonuses through the first several years. This profitability piece doesn't really kick in until you're more of a mid-level to a senior associate in terms of your profitability on your own time. But there's so for associate comp, there's the base comp, there's some set bonuses of which are more objective, and then there's discretionary bonuses. Whit, anything to add on that, on these two examples?
Well, I suppose all I would show to everyone who's a young lawyer, and I know we're kind of using big law type industry statistics here, but the same thing will apply if you're going to work at a private law firm. If it's a mid-level firm or a boutique firm, I think everyone can see that although the numbers may vary from firm to firm, the same general principles will apply. And an associate can help himself or herself by billing more hours, by doing work where time doesn't have to be written off. So doing really good work that can be sent very efficiently to a client and used and paid for by a client. All those factors are places where a young attorney can help himself or herself. Now, admittedly, there's some factors beyond that young attorney's control, but as I'm thinking about the audience that we're speaking to here, people who are in law school and getting ready to go out into the work world, I think an understanding of how this works from the law firm perspective is really helpful to you.
One thing I would add to that, Whit, is this all seems very monetary, but I will say, like at our firm, and I know every firm is different, in the November, December timeframe of every year, we spend a tremendous amount of time looking at each and every single associate, how their year was, their work. We do evaluations, significant evaluations. Each practice group meets. Then we have evaluations specifically with the associate, and then we walk through the bonus process very carefully over multiple meetings during that time frame. So it's a really important process, because at the end of the day, for a law firm, any law firm, you have to have strong, younger lawyers who are, really doing a great job and doing efficient, great work for our clients. And they want to be compensated. So it's Whit and my job and our other leaders in the firm to make sure the associates feel like they are fairly compensated for the work they do.
And Tom, I'll say, to be really blunt about it, if our economics aren't sufficiently strong and those really talented associates aren't getting compensated the way they feel like they should, there's plenty of opportunity to go to another firm.
Yeah.
And that ends up being one of the main factors for firm leadership, because it's not just the economics, it's not just the economic performance, it's moving from year to year and from period to period, having stronger and stronger attorneys with better and better clients. And that's the way ultimately it gets measured.
Yeah.
Can I ask you two questions? First of all, how do your paralegals factor into that, where I assume they bill at a relatively high rate, but not the attorney rate? And then the other one really relates to fixed fee billing, where you have, a deal, let's say, that's it's part of some sort of alternative fee arrangement where it's a lump sum, and you may have to allocate, more hours to that than what you budgeted.
Two great questions. First of all, so paralegals are treated similarly to associates. They do have an hourly rate. They're on kind of a different bonus structure, Eric. So they, we track their hours. Their profitability numbers are usually very different than the lawyer profitability numbers, but we go through an evaluation with them as well. Each lawyer who works with a paralegal can evaluate them during the year, and then they're eligible for a bonus at the end of the year as well. With respect to fixed fee billing, it kind of depends on the fixed fee. But what happens is, if you've agreed to do a project for $200,000, at the end of the day, you spread that fee out across the group, and you make sure everyone's treated fairly that's working on the project. And so there's there's reallocations that are done, Eric, in a fixed fee process. I'm working on an issue right now where we're for a client of mine looking at doing an employment, like kind of an HR retainer, where we have some of our, we're calling it a bat phone. May show my age from Batman show, but it's a bat phone type situation where the client can call us for a flat fee for kind of basic HR employment issues over the course of a month, and they'll pay us a certain fee for that month. And there's going to be about 3 or 4 lawyers involved in that situation. The time, the fee that's brought in every month will be spread across those lawyers who are participating in that flat fee situation. Does that make sense, Eric?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Let's move to the next slide. I know and Eric, you let us know when we're running out of time or whatever. So
we still have about, 34 minutes, so
okay.
You're good.
Okay. And we'll keep rolling through this. The questions have been great, but also invite questions at the end. But let's talk real quickly about partner compensation. We talked about associates. We just talked about paralegals. Most firms will have kind of two levels of partner: non-equity partners and equity partners. Equity partners participate in the profits of the firm. Non-equity partners sometimes do, but they typically are more from a comp perspective, purely a comp perspective. It's more of a compensation, somewhat like an associate, where they've got a base salary plus some kind of discretionary bonus. We at Locke are moving away from having non-equity partners, and pretty much if you're a partner, everyone is an equity partner. We're literally in the middle of that transition process. Again, every firm is different. But I'll speak real quickly to equity partners. And again, a lot of people on this call are a few years away from being an equity partner, but the equity partner compensation process can vary at every firm, big, medium, small. And I have very good friends. I have a really good friend who's at a smaller firm, and he and I laugh about our different compensation processes because they can vary widely. Just to give you a quick example, at our firm, basically the partners, you get a percentage of the net income that's brought in by the firm. We have a budget when the year starts, what we expect our net income to be. And Whit and I are very lucky during our life as partners since, I guess, what 2000, 99, 2000, somewhere in there?
Yep.
We've never missed our budget. In fact, we're typically way above our budget, which is great. So you get a percentage of that net income budget. And typically the way we are paid is you get a monthly draw plus distributions during the course of the year. At Locke, we have a very extensive equity partner compensation process that essentially starts with each partner doing a memo in the early part of the year, so say January. And then each partner is interviewed by a member of the executive committee. And then the executive committee, we meet for about 5 days at a hotel. And it sounds glamorous, but it's not. We literally sit in a hotel conference room for 5 days and go through each and every, right now we have 281 partners, I think. We go through each and every person for 5 days. And we come up with what we believe to be the fair compensation based upon their client work, their billing work, as well as their own working numbers. So you have a billing attorney time, and then you have a working attorney time, your own hours, and then your book of business. And so at the end of that process, we have a budget for what we believe we're going to have to spread out among the partners, and we come up with a compensation number. Some firms call them units, points, but we come up with a number for each person who's an equity partner, and then those numbers are published. Some firms don't publish their partner numbers. We do. Those numbers are published basically at the beginning of March, and then there could be an appeal process. Sometimes we get it wrong, and partners can have an appeal, and then we come up with a final number basically by mid-March, and then that's your compensation number for the year. So it's similar to the associate compensation process. It's very detailed, and at the end of the day, people want to be treated fairly and compensated fairly, and that's why we spend so much time on it, and that's why the billing process, all the stuff we've already talked about, increasing revenues, decreasing expenses, at the end of the day, it's so important because of the partners. It's just critical to make sure that we can make sure both the partners and the associates are fairly compensated.
So Tom,
Whit, you want to add anything to that?
I do want to add a couple of points. I think it's good for everyone on the call to think back to earlier in this presentation where we talked about the partners sharing in the net income. So it's revenues less expenses equals net income. And that's what Tom's talking about here is the amount of net income. And if you visualize that as a pie, what Tom's talking about is how much, what piece of the pie does Tom get? What piece of the pie does Whit Roberts get? What piece of the pie does every other equity partner get? With that preface in mind, it's important how law firms, and it has an impact on the culture of a firm as to how law firms treat that. Way back in the day, there were a lot of firms that used to be a lockstep partnership, which means if you are a particular class in a partnership, so Tom and I would be the class of 2000, everyone had the same piece of the pie based on that class. that is almost unheard of these days. I can only think of one firm that still does that. Highly profitable firm where everyone takes home plenty of money, but that has, in almost, except for that one instance, that model has gone away. And so then you end up with, all right, how are you going to divide up the pie? Are you going to do it at the beginning of the year? And that's the way that Locke Lord has done it. And what that leads to is Tom knows and I know that the only way I'm going to get paid more at the end of the year is to make the pie bigger, because my piece is not going to change. There are other firms that wait to slice up the pieces of the pie until the very end of the year. And so there's a big, I don't know what I'd call it, discussion about what piece of the pie does each attorney get at the end of the year. And then some firms will do it in a different way, where they divide up the pie at the beginning, but they leave a big piece to be divided up at the end of the year with a bonus or otherwise. That's important for you to know, because 8, 10, however many years from now, many of you likely will be partners at a law firm, and you'll have to make the decision on how the world should work at your firm. But I think coming out of law school and coming out of graduate school, it's good for you to know that, because the way that's done at the partnership level impacts your life. It impacts your life on, all right, how do the partners work together, or are the partners more competitive with each other than cooperative, based on how the firm determines the pieces of the pie? That's what I would add, Tom.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. At the end of the day, guys and ladies, it's all about fundamental fairness within a firm. You want to go work, if you go to work at a firm, law firm economics, very important to law firm economics is fundamental fairness in terms of compensation. And Whit and I, again, we're very lucky to be where we are. Let's move to the next one. I know we're going to move through this.
I'll point out that it's 1:05. I don't know. We still got to go through real estate, which I know people want to talk about, client development, and law firm metrics. So I don't know if we want to touch on any of this lightly and move on.
Yeah, this is just there. One point to be made. There's lots of different types of lawyers within firms. You got partner. We talked about partners and associates. There are folks on different tracks, depending on the firm. Sometimes you may have you may not want to become a partner. You may want to be a counsel or a senior counsel. So this slide just highlights the fact that there are different types of positions within any given law firm, just to make you aware of that, which you're probably already aware of. So let's go to real estate real quick. When we've touched on this, again, it's a huge expense within law firms. I think because of the pandemic, as I mentioned earlier, things will change, and you're going to have law firms reducing their footprint. And I think you will have more people working remotely. I don't see it, and Whit may disagree. I don't see law firms, and some law firms may. I don't see our law firm going to fully, really encouraging fully working remotely because of the other issues that we think are really important, the cultural issues, the mentoring issues that are so important. There's no substitute for, and I know where Whit is sitting in his office. He's got a round table in his office. I know how many times Whit has sat at that round table in his office and walked through some kind of corporate deal document with a young associate, explaining to them, what he agrees with and what he disagrees with and what they've presented to him. That kind of mentoring is hard to do via Zoom or via over the phone. And so there will be some reduction in space, certainly, but we'll see where it all goes. So it's just, the bottom line on real estate costs, they're very important. Typically, we have very nice space. Most firms of all sizes have nice, good space, and it costs a lot of money. So there's just going to be, there will be changes. It's just a question of how much, in Whit in my legal career, it'll change some. I think for you all who have, 25, 30, 40 years ahead of you, it's going to change dramatically, for sure. Let's go to client development, which is really important. And Whit and I do a lot of this with our clients. Again, you may think this is a little bit of a strange slide to have here on law firm economics, but at the end of the day, it's the bottom line. I mean, clients are critical to what we do. You have to have clients. You have to be out there beating the bushes, talking to people, really working hard to develop clients, over time. And then even when you bring clients in, which is hard work, there's all kinds of things you can do, whether it's dinners, ball games, all that kind of stuff, just meeting people through the community. At the end of the day, you get them in the door, then you've got, making them a client. Are there conflicts within a firm? Sometimes you can't bring in a client because we represent somebody else who's adverse to that client. It's challenging. But I will say within our firm, and a lot of firms do this, we try to give training to the younger associates on how to do this, because it's just not, so for some people, it's just not intuitive about how to get out there. We are very entrepreneurial. We encourage our associates to go out and develop clients. And a little bit of advice I would give this group is keep track of your undergrad friends, your law school friends, because as you grow up, wherever you land, those people are growing up as well, whether they're with companies or the government or whatever. Keep track of people, get involved in your community. I know both Whit and I, Whit and I both do a lot within our church communities, our school communities. That's another way to develop clients. At the end of the day, it's fun to get clients. It's fun to meet new clients. Some of my very best friends in this world are people who were clients first, and they know all my kids. They've watched my kids grow up, and it's fun. It's a really fun part of what we do. But it's key, getting clients, keeping clients happy over time, and that's where the new lawyers come into play as well, is so critical to law firm economics. It's the foundation, frankly. So, Whit, anything to add on that?
Well, I'll add this point. I don't want to overemphasize it, but I'm going to be blunt. If you want to be someone who is an influencer in your law firm and who is a leader in the law firm, this is called a business leadership seminar. If you are the one who has the client relationship, you have a seat at the table. And in terms of where a law firm goes and the way that the law firm works. Every law firm needs people who are technically expert. Every law firm needs people who contribute in other ways at the law firm. But since this has become more and more of a business, the person who has the client relationship ends up becoming more and more influential. So I'm blunt. I don't want to overemphasize it because there still are a lot of people who may not have the client relationship who are important to the firm. But client development has become more and more important over the course of Tom's career and my career, and I think that will continue to trend that way as you guys get out into your business careers.
Let's go to the next one, Andre. The next two slides really talk about, as I mentioned at the very beginning, there's a lot of competition out there. We are judged under a lot of metrics. The American Lawyer puts out metrics on all law firms and really focuses on the AmLaw 100, the AmLaw 200. They look at key financial and profitability metrics that we are really kind of under the microscope every year. And, we use the benchmarks to measure ourselves against the peers. And so let's go to the next one. I'll talk quickly about a couple of the key ones. And you can pull up our metrics in the American Lawyer, but profit per equity partner is very important. And then revenues per lawyer, there's somewhat of a debate. Which one of those is more important? I kind of go back and forth. But profit per equity partner indicates the average equity partner compensation. And you'll see some wildly different numbers depending on the firms out there. Revenue per lawyer, it's the level of revenue on average a lawyer in the firm generates. So it can, revenue per lawyer can be a little bit more accurate in terms of on a per lawyer basis, not per partner. And then
harder to manipulate, when you say, Tom, kind of a harder number to manipulate.
Yeah, it's harder, exactly. Revenues per lawyer, because there's different levels of partners, and I think some firms are better than others about sometimes accurately reporting what their numbers are. The headcount is obviously important. It can change. Headcount can change all the time. Lawyers leave, we add groups. As I mentioned earlier, Whit and I have experienced big changes in our lifetime as lawyers when we've done mergers. And then leverage is really important. How many lawyers per equity partner? You try to have that method where you can again push work to lower cost lawyers, which creates efficiencies for the client and also can increase profitabilities for the firm. So all of those, those individual type metrics are important to look at, as opposed to just looking at overall revenue of a firm. It's really important as you start looking at firms and thinking about firms out there, what are these individualized metrics per lawyer, per partner? Because they can be telling, and firms, firms can have great years, they can have good years, and they can have so-so years, and then even have bad years. And it's interesting right now, Eric, with the pandemic, our chair, David Taylor, who's just a wonderful, wonderful leader, he has been spending a lot of times on calls with law firms, other firm leaders, other firm chairs. And it's interesting, most firms out there are saying, hey, we're doing great. It's going to be interesting when these numbers come out at the beginning of 2021, what the numbers frankly really look like. Now, I'm not saying the pandemic's going to be over. I don't think at January 1, 2021, we're necessarily going to be beyond all this. But I think that the pandemic has had a lot of impacts on law firms this year, and it's just going to be interesting to see what these different metrics look like when that's all said and done.
I know we're short on time, but comparing it to 2008, don't you feel like it's a different kind of financial impact in that, I was in-house at the time, and basically what happened was when the credit crisis became evident, companies immediately stopped any sort of, discretionary type of transactional work in particular. So you saw areas around M&A. Maybe the finance people were busy because they're trying to renegotiate, credit facilities and stuff like that. But ultimately, that led to this domino effect, which really impacted firms in a very significant way. I'm not personally seeing that this time. It's a different kind of economic crisis.
This one, and Whit, feel free to disagree, but this one is so much more broad-based compared to the financial crisis. It was, and I do a lot of financial services work, so I lived it and I really watched it post, both in the middle of it and then after. The effects of this one are so wide-ranging. It's just, it's just more broad, and you see firms really, literally changing kind of models somewhat overnight. Like the real estate's a good example. So it's different. It feels way different. What do you think, Whit?
I just think we're also right in the middle of it. It's easier to see what 2008 is because we can see it from our rearview mirror. We're just right in the middle of this right now, and we're waiting for it to unfold. Could I add one other thing, Tom, about law firm metrics?
Sure.
When Tom and I started, and I don't mean to talk too often about those the dark ages, but I can still remember when we got out of law school that Locke refused to give those numbers, just as a matter of principle. Just
Sure.
refused to give those numbers to the American lawyer. Now, every firm simply has to give them, simply because of peer pressure. If you're not giving them, you know that all of your peers are, and they're going to be compared, and you will be left out, and usually viewed negatively as a result. I think Tom and I, because we spent our whole career at this law firm, we view success as building a firm that has better and better lawyers from year to year, as a result serving more and more clients on more and more sophisticated matters, moving from strength to strength. The reason I bring this up as we're looking at law firm metrics is that the ongoing disclosure from year to year of the financial metrics of a law firm ends up contributing dramatically to the lawyers that you have at your firm and the clients that you serve. And it makes, again, I'm going to be really blunt here, but Tom, you can correct me or clarify. It ends up leading to the strong getting stronger and the weak getting weaker. And it's just the maturation of the legal industry. These law firm metrics end up driving attorneys that have healthy practices to stronger firms, and weaker firms losing those kind of attorneys.
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying that it happens overnight, but I'm saying the trend over years, law firm metrics matter because of the talent and the clients that each firm has.
Totally agree. Totally agree. A couple more slides, Eric. Let's go to the flexible work arrangements. This is really important in really most firms, and it can be important to law firm economics and whether someone wants to work at a firm. And that is the ability to have a flexible work arrangement depending on children or other family issues or whatever. So that's always been an important piece here at Locke. We have multiple lawyers under flexible work arrangements where say they may be working 70% of the time or something like that, as opposed to 100%. Then there's differing compensations depending upon that person's flexible work arrangement. But it's just a critical piece to any firm to be, and I think this is something that we're seeing right now. We're living this because of, especially as we roll into the fall with school starting again, and people whose kids are going to be working online. These kinds of situations are going to probably become more prevalent post-pandemic. But again, it's important to have the ability for lawyers to have flexible work arrangements depending on their own personal circumstances. Let's go to the final one. This really is more about, I think, and I know Whit thinks all of this is very important to law firm economics, but Whit and I both agreed. We're talking to people who are just going to be starting your careers. And the dollars and cents part of it is really important, but it's also important to make sure you succeed within a law firm and that you can contribute to the bottom line through good practices, which at the end of the day benefit law firm economics. So these are kind of top 10 tips. We'll run through these very quickly, and they may seem really basic and really kind of, wow, you're telling us this. You'd be surprised when people, that people don't follow these kinds of tips. But at the end of the day, you will be paid a good salary no matter where you are. I like to joke with people. I tell the younger lawyers all the time that it's a service industry. We're kind of like plumbers, maintenance folks that we fix problems, and our quality has to be really good. People call us because they want us to fix a problem. So our quality and your quality that you produce as a younger lawyer when you start, that's where you get your reputation, and your reputation to do quality work is really critical. And part of that is thoroughly going through projects, taking the time to do the work the right way, and don't do, kind of not a very good, don't turn in a half-baked project. It's just never a good idea. And part of that is, communicating well with the people that give you the projects. It's just really communication, especially in these times where we're all via Zoom or telephone or email, is just absolutely critical. Whit, anything on those first few?
I imagine you're going to make this point, but I'll go ahead and make it here. Working in a law firm and working with older lawyers is the best way to start to build up your practices about how you will have clients. Because those more senior lawyers, if they're receptive to your work, if they're receptive to your judgment, if they are receptive to the way that you are communicating with them, that is a really, really good signal on how your clients are going to receive your work as you work with them directly. Go ahead, Bob.
And, and this really goes to the next one, in any firm, small, medium, big, find the people you can go to with what I like to call the stupid questions, because we all have stupid questions. And, find those people you can seek advice from. That's critical. While we try to be efficient and rely upon prior work product, which clients frankly expect us to do, they don't want us to reinvent the wheel. Be careful of that. Don't just rely on forms. Make sure you're updating things and doing good research. This is critical. I mean, at any part of your career, and Whit and I talk about it as partners, teamwork within a law firm is critical. You've got to be a good team player. And within our firm, people who don't play well with others typically are not very successful within our firm. You have to be a good team member. For the younger lawyers, when you start out, it's always important to consider the older lawyers as kind of your clients, because you may not be interfacing with the clients right away. And so, look to them as your clients in terms of giving them great work product. Early on, try to work with a lot of different people within your firm, partners and associates, because everybody practices law differently. There's no single way to do it, and you can learn a lot from others. Become invested immediately in any place you work. It's really important. And then, kind of the age-old piece of advice, which will serve you well as you go through your career, is treat everybody with respect. Use good judgment. I know that all sounds very trite, but I was just saying this the other day to somebody that if someone shows good judgment, I mean, that can take them so far in their career. And if they respect others, whether it's opposing counsel or the people within your own firm, you have a reputation, you develop a reputation early, and those things are just critical to your long-term success and, frankly, the long-term success of wherever you land. So what about anything to add on that, Whit?
I would just end with this. We spent a whole lot of time talking about dollars and cents and finances. And, at some point, particularly attorneys recently out of law school can start to feel like a widget in a large machine. We want to wish you guys the very best of success in your legal career. And there will be different chapters in your legal career. And that's why we wanted to leave you with these tips. You guys are entering into a noble profession, and you're going to be working with people, your clients, who need your help crucially and need for people to handle themselves with the highest level of professionalism. The business is the business, but we wish you the very best as you move in as an attorney and a counselor and a licensed practitioner of the law.
Totally agree with all that. Go ahead, Eric.
Thank you. That's excellent. We have time now for a few more questions. If you'd like to put those in the chat, we can field those. So go ahead. I will add too, we have a nice comment from Sean that says this framework is incredibly valuable to us to see and conceptualize.
Great. We're glad.
Well, we're looking for one. I thought of one. So I'm sure this doesn't happen at Locke Lord, but at my firm, there were certain partners that everybody knew to avoid if possible. And they happened to bring in a lot of money. And frankly, I remember when I worked with, he was honestly brilliant, but he had trouble communicating what the question was from the client, and maybe wasn't even sure what the work product was that he wanted it to begin with. So seriously, you go, and it wasn't very efficient, first of all. But you'd go work on something and bring it back, and it was honestly very different than what he had in his head that he was having trouble to say. He was also a very nice man, some are not, right? And so what would be your advice in sort of navigating those but while building your brand and also being a team player?
So I'll take a shot first. We mentioned it a minute ago, and this is hard, especially with that type of person, Eric, is really communicating with that person. And it can be difficult to sit in that partner's office and ask those questions to make sure you really understand what the issues are before you go off and spend 20 hours researching the problem and come back and that's the completely wrong rabbit trail that person wanted you to go down. So I think the best way to deal with that person, if possible, is try to have some level of good communication with them. If not, then you do your best. And as I mentioned earlier, within our firm, we try to have a low jerk quotient, which we like to refer to, but you're going to have some, and you have to deal with them as best you can. And usually within a firm, people understand that you're dealing with that person and you're doing the best you can. But I think communication, frankly, Eric, is the key to trying to navigate that challenging situation. There was a partner here who's frankly still here that I worked with a lot as a senior associate, and I was really nervous about working with that person because he was kind of that way. And I just forced myself. I wouldn't just show up at his door. I would email him ahead of time, or I'd call him and say, hey, do you have 5 minutes to talk? And that was the way I navigated that situation, but every situation like that's different. Whit, anything on that?
I mean, sometimes you can find an associate who's a couple of years ahead of you who has learned how to do it. Take tips from that person. That's the only thing I would add.
Great advice. Any other questions from the class? Well, maybe in conclusion, I'd ask you just to give our students some tips. And by the way, this is one of the objectives of the Rolling Center, is to help law students be better at business and understand some of the business concepts and principles that you don't normally learn in a law school curriculum. What things would you suggest that our our aspiring attorneys really focus on in order to become better at understanding and working within business, whether as a law firm, partner or associate, or even in-house?
The thing I would say, Eric, and this sounds again, and this may sound trite and simple, but at the end of the day, in our practice, Whit is exactly right. And as you guys can tell, Whit and I have known each other for a long time. He's one of the greatest people I know. And, you know, it's really important to have strong relationships in what you do. What we do, practicing law can be really fun. It can be really fun and it can be really challenging. But to really succeed, I think it's so important to develop strong relationships, both within your firm, wherever you land, you know, small, medium, large firms, just really work on those relationships within the firm. And then importantly, just as importantly, is work on relationships outside the firm. Be uncomfortable, be fearless, go to the lunches, the dinners, the seminars, the things over at the BELO that you might otherwise, you know, it's easy to sit in your office, but it's hard to get out and meet people. And at the end of the day, you never know, that person you met 5 years ago at some meeting or some lunch, they remember you, they see something you wrote, and they call you. And that's just so satisfying. So I think, you know, the dollars and cents stuff is important. You know, you got to work on that. You got to be efficient. You got to be smart. You got to timely record your time, all these things we've talked about. But in our business, it really is a people business, whether it's within where you work or out there in the world. And I just think it's critical that you develop those relationships over time, because you never know. You never know when one of those people is going to become a great client of yours and a lifelong friend. So I mean, that sounds kind of silly, but I think relationships are so key to success.
And I'll add, I think kind of with the other, what I consider kind of the other half of the answer from a lawyer's perspective, and I hold Tom in just similar high regard and value our longtime friendship, just as Tom said. But I've watched Tom do this too. He's focused on relationships, just like he said, and that has paid off in his career. But early on in his career, which is where you guys will be very shortly, focus on building up your technical expertise as a lawyer. If you're going to be in a particular area of the practice of law, know it, work it, understand the issues and how they are addressed so you can solve them for your clients. It's two sides of a coin. The relationships are just as important as Tom explained, but being an expert at the problems that you're solving as a lawyer is just paramount. And the time to develop that, because you don't have the distractions of building up clients, you don't have a lot of the other distractions that come later in your career. The best time to develop that is in your very first years out of law school. That would be my part of the advice.
That's great advice. Well, thank you, gentlemen. We really appreciate your time. This was very helpful. I honestly wished I'd heard this when I was in law school. It's not a view of the law that you typically hear. So thank you very much. We appreciate your participation. We'll wish you well and encourage you to keep healthy and safe. And everyone else, thank you for attending, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wishes to all.
Yep. Good luck, everybody.
Thank you.